Hello everyone, welcome to the Climate Careers Chat. We're hosted by Sustainable Leaders in Action, which is Sustainable Contra Costa's youth-led team and the Contra Costa County Library. So my name is Emily, and I'm the Climate Careers Chat intern at Sustainable Leaders in Action. I'm currently a junior at Middle College High School, and I've been in SLIA for like over a year now, almost 2 years. And I love learning about everything science and environmental related. I really want to major in chemistry and see how like that can be intertwined with like helping preserve our planet. So that's why I'm interested in climate careers chat and sustainable leaders in action. Um, so thank you all so much for being here. So here's a quick little overview of our agenda for tonight's program. We'll start by introducing our team, hear from our first panelist, Chris Lim. We'll have a short little informational break, and we'll move on to hearing a little bit from our second panelist, Katie Noonan. And afterwards, we'll have time for a Q&A portion. So please submit any questions you guys have whenever during the program using the Q&A function on Zoom. It should be at the bottom of your screen, and we'll answer them all at the end. So you can just pop them in whenever. And lastly, we'll finish up with some closing remarks.
Founded in 2020, the Climate Careers Chats are produced by Sustainable Leaders in Action, which is Sustainable Contra Costa's youth-led team, and we are co-hosted and funded through our partnership with the Contra Costa County Library. Since 2020, we have had 14 previous Climate Careers Chats, and we are so happy to be continuing our partnership with the library for this awesome program. My name is Arv. I'm a junior at Amador Valley High School and have been an active SLIA member since August of this year. My interests include policy and geography and how we can use policy and advocacy to help protect our environment. Thank you everyone for attending the 2024 December Climate Careers Chat hosted by SLIA. Now I'm going to pass the mic to our SLIA advisor, Eliana Batrez.
Ellie, you're muted.
Gosh. Almost Friday, everyone. Hello, my name is Eliana Batrez, and I am the Senior Program Specialist at Sustainable Contra Costa, also known as SCOCO, which was founded in 2008. We are a community of citizens, educators, innovators, and organizations working together for ecologically sustainable, economically vibrant, and socially just communities for all. Together, we help thousands of people each year learn to live more sustainably and make changes to save water and energy, reduce waste, grow food, and build healthy, resilient communities. Now for a special welcome to our co-host for the event, our esteemed collaborating librarian, Albert Garcia from the Contra Costa Library. He will introduce himself and then tell us a little bit more about the amazing resources the library has available, the Contra Costa County Library.
Thank you, Ellie. Thank you very much. Yes, I'm so happy to be here. Like Ellie says, Albert Garcia, I'm a librarian with Adult Services at Contra Costa. I've been lucky enough to partner with SLIA now for a couple of years and always just so happy and impressed by the talent and all the hard work that the students put in. So thank you for doing that. And yes, I'd like to say a little bit about the library. The Contra Costa County Library is happy to connect you with our resources, services, and materials at all 26 of our branches. Access more than 1 million physical items, including international language collections, and thousands of digital materials 24/7 at ccclib.org. Next slide, please. Visit any library to use our public computers, printers, and free Wi-Fi. You can also visit one of our branches with laptops for on-site use or check out a Wi-Fi hotspot for 3 weeks. Contra Costa County Library's adult literacy program trains and supports volunteer tutors to deliver basic literacy instruction to adults throughout the county. Visit our website and sign up for a digital library card today. Thank you so much, and I'm going to hand it back to SLIA.
Let's give it up for our amazing panelists, Chris Lim and Katie Noonan, for joining us as panelists tonight for our Climate Careers Chat. We are so excited for you to all hear about them.
Okay, so let's give a little bit of information on our first panelist of the night, Chris Lim. So Chris is a conservationist that has been in the restoration field for over 25 years. Chris has worked with the communities to restore native species and habitats from the top to the bottom of watersheds. He built one of the first community-based native oyster reefs in San Francisco Bay and relishes the opportunity to interweave restoration projects with environmental education. As a Contra Costa County native, he finds his current work of increasing resilience in his local watersheds deeply meaningful and rewarding.
Now we're going to play a quick little game of two truths and a lie to get to know our first panelists.
So Chris, could you please read out your two truths and a lie?
Sure. So I've restored steelhead trout habitats. I've restored native Olympia oyster habitat. I've restored beaver habitat. I guess we gave one away in the bio. I apologize, but I wanted to be on theme with these three. So.
Okay, so a poll has just opened up, so please put your answers in and vote on which you think is the lie. All right, I see that I restored beaver habitat is winning by a majority right now. What do you think is the lie?
I'm going to be different and say that the lie is number one, the steelhead trout habitat.
You know, I was thinking the same thing. Okay, so the poll has just closed up and the beaver habitat has won. Chris, so which one is the lie?
Steelhead trout habitat is a good one because that's actually the only endangered and threatened species on this list. But it's actually beaver habitat, so number 3. But I included that one because it's me trying to manifest that. That's one of the next ones we're looking to do.
All right, I love that. Okay, so now that we know a little bit about Chris, we're going to pass it off to him now for him to show us his presentation.
Great. Let me get my PowerPoint going. Can everybody see that all right? All right,
Yep,
cool. Yeah, so I just want to start off by saying thank you to the young folks on this call and to the Sustainable Leaders in Action and Sustainable Contra Costa for inviting me to be here tonight. A little bit about me. This picture right here is from the native oyster reef. Katie will know this well, but this is one of the first reefs in San Francisco Bay. So real proud of the work. This was done mostly with volunteers and with school groups to construct these structures that essentially provide habitat for oysters, which then provide, if you imagine all the nooks and crannies of the oyster shells, they provide spaces for worms and for other small critters to live, which then become food for bigger animals like fish and for birds. So you get a whole ecosystem service just from this restoration. Okay, so I'm gonna kind of zip through my work currently. So I'm the executive director with the Contra Costa Resource Conservation District. Our mission is to facilitate the conservation and stewardship of the natural resources of Contra Costa County. And we do that primarily through voluntary partnerships. I'm not going to read these, folks can take a look at them, but just a whole set of different partners and anybody sort of willing and wanting to work with the RCD. And we have a number of programs ranging from working with agriculture, so with farmers and ranchers, working in watersheds, trying to enhance the health of our watersheds, restoring habitats such as steelhead trout habitats, and some new programs. Environmental education is sort of, you'll see in slides upcoming, but is kind of where I got my start. So it's very near and dear to my heart. And then also thinking about wildfire. That's sort of a new program for our organization. And then just sort of my role, if folks aren't familiar with executive director, it's sort of equivalent to like a CEO for a business or something like that. Oftentimes folks refer to us as the decision makers. So if folks need help with a decision or direction for the organization or their programs, I'm happy to make decisions. So responsible for just the day-to-day oversight of staff and executing the vision and strategy of the board of directors. All right, so enough about work. Let's talk a little bit about my path. I think that's sort of the goal for today, and the invite was about me talking about my pathway to where I am today. So in terms of an outline, just talk about an origin for me and that origin story, thinking about my education, and then getting into my work. And then I wanted to wrap up with some advice for young people trying to get into the field, and then some opportunities that folks can get into. All right, so this is not my origin story, but there's sort of a, in my years of being in this field, there is sort of a typical quote unquote origin story for environmentalists. Oftentimes folks talk about their families and, you know, they go outdoors and they go camping and they sort of, you know, maybe are taught some things by the parents and guardians, and they sort of start to get this love for the environment and are inspired to, you know, want to protect it or conserve it, or, you know, be able to keep on experiencing the outdoors. And then that eventually leads into this sort of pathway of becoming a steward or involved in stewardship. But that's not sort of my story. And so thinking about my story kind of in hindsight and thinking about, you know, how did I get to where I am today, like starting way back, and sort of my interests when I was young. I used to really be into these books, like this one book called like How Things Work. And I remember I had a book called Why Things Are. And those, you know, I look back on that and those are like science books and scientist books, right? And that's the stuff that really interested me. You know, I was really into science. I was into animals. If folks are familiar with these zoo books, like that was a highlight for me, like going to the zoo and then at the end you bought like a zoo book and it talked about the animals. And hopefully they still print these. I don't know. I think I've seen them in some classrooms recently, but newer versions. And I've always had a love for the ocean and the beach. So there's that part of it, but it was never anything where, you know, it was sort of, I did that with my family or things. Those are just sort of separate. And, but I think sort of getting into college and studying about marine biology and oceanography, that was my emphasis in school. And, you know, I was into sort of the science parts, but that was where I really learned about sort of the beautiful interconnections and how everything in nature is interconnected and how everything is connected to people, and the choices that we make do make a difference. And then after college, that was when I got into hiking and camping. And so a little bit of a different story, maybe, but still one that I look back on it, I'm fond of, because it happened. And so we're here today. So I'm originally from these watersheds in Contra Costa. I'm originally from Lafayette. I went to Acalanes High School. Some of the students here know that high school. I just remember that my favorite subject in school was science and biology, mostly. And thinking about school, you know, my mom and my aunt went to UC Berkeley, and so hearing about that, it was something that I was also into. And I majored in integrative biology, which is basically everything but molecular cell biology. And I did an emphasis in marine biology and oceanography. I picked that because I was interested in fish and the ocean. And I was thinking that if I majored in that I would always have a job near the ocean. So that was sort of the inspiration for that. And then after a little bit more time in school, I minored in geography. And I always tell folks that this is like a National Geographic magazine. So it's sort of science, but how it affects people. And looking back on it, it was really nice to be able to get sort of the hard sciences through my biology degree, but then also how that relates to people. And a lot of the geography classes I took were related to like coral reefs and to islands and to community-based conservation on islands. Maybe I was trying to get to an island one day as well. And then I wanted to make a note here that I actually took a 10-year gap before I went back to school to get my master's. And I went to the University of San Francisco. And this reasoning will come to light a little bit soon as well. But I got a master's of nonprofit administration. So that is similar to an MBA, but for nonprofits. And this was a program that was designed for working professionals. I couldn't really afford to not be working. So this program was designed for those folks and us. And so I remember that, for 27 months, we would meet every Tuesday from like 6:15 to 10:15. And it was intense. And, I remember I would be working, but then also having to do homework. And I would be in a cafe Friday afternoon and everybody would be having fun and I'd be doing homework. But we made it through. It was definitely worth it, and an investment in myself. And I just wanted to include a few pictures from work. I don't have a ton, but just to note that I have had all the positions in this field from intern to executive director. So I know all the roles and have worked myself up. This is actually a picture. Can folks see my cursor? Okay, cool. I'm actually here in the back. This was when I was an AmeriCorps member, and we were actually looking to monitor oysters that were on these shells. This is me on an oyster farm in, where is this? In Smallest Bay, and doing environmental education with folks there. And I also spent a lot of my work in a laboratory. So I have spent lots of hours in front of a microscope and looking at larval organisms and things like that. So yeah, kind of sort of satisfied when I got out of college, satisfied my inner scientist. And I enjoyed that. I was also out in the field a lot. I did a lot of sort of sediment core sampling. I was out on the bay on a boat for, 12 hours at a time, taking sediment cores and inhaling fumes and trying to do that. And while I really enjoyed that at the time, I also felt like I wanted to do something a little bit more rewarding and meaningful and trying to make more of a difference. So here's sort of a list of the positions I have had. I've been in the restoration economy for almost 25 years now. And I reflect on it and, putting this presentation together, and, I probably have another 20 years in the field. So what can we do together to accomplish some of our conservation goals? But this is also, so I have the list of organizations and businesses and others on the right-hand side and positions on the left-hand side. I purposely meant for this to be difficult to read because this is not exactly what we're talking about today. But I have sort of summarized in this slide kind of something a little bit more relevant, I think. So here's sort of a key for these circles here, you can see that I've worked in all three sectors: public, private, and nonprofit. The sizes of these circles are relative to the time that I was at that position. And then I sort of have listed here sort of the main themes of the work when I was in these positions. So you can see, you know, I was doing field work in environmental education. I was in the lab and doing more field work, and then back to environmental education, and then in lab again, and then, you know, environmental education shows up again. And then this is where sort of restoration education, I was able to really combine those two, and I really saw that as meaningful work to be able to connect young people with environmental education, but then bring them out into the field and have them do some of the work and have, you know, get their hands a little bit dirty and get their shoes a little bit wet and really experience what science is like when we're actually out there and doing it. And then as executive director, sort of taking on more of this administration piece and the leadership pieces, you know, have grown to enjoy that, and you know, leading an organization and being able to support staff and see them grow and grow the programs is one of my favorite parts of what I do now. I do want to show sort of this timeline again. So this is where I finished my undergrad, and then this is where I started graduate school. So you can see that this 10-year gap in between, I didn't want to go directly to graduate school because I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to go back for. So once I figured it out, then that's when I found the program that would be a fit. And then this big one up here, inspiring the next generation of environmental professionals, is sort of what I see as one of my main roles in my current position. And to inspire young people, or not so young people, to get into this field and to be able to have opportunities and to have livable wages and better than livable wages to be able to do this kind of work. The other piece that is connected to this is that I want this field and the professionals to reflect the diversity of California. There's sort of I was actually at a conference recently, I actually just got back today. And the room, you know, I've been going to conferences for years now. And the room is skewing younger in terms of the folks who are working. So that is a positive. But there's still definitely a lack of diversity in the staff of these organizations. And so that needs to change. And so part of my role is trying to help do what I can to change the demographics of that room and of the folks on staff. Okay. So thinking about some advice to the young people here, and hopefully will watch the video, but find your passion and figure out how to get paid to do it. You know, the environment and environmentalism is my passion, so I feel very fortunate to be able to do what I love and get paid to do that. Try different sectors. So you sort of know each one has its pros and cons, and certain folks like certain ones. And I would suggest that folks try them all to be able to see which one you enjoy. And then focus on, you know, building and progressing your pathway. You saw sort of my career arc. So keep an eye out for opportunities. And then this work backwards. You know, when I sort of identified that I wanted to become an executive director, I thought about what are sort of the gaps in my knowledge, and then where can I fill those? And that's where graduate school came in. So I was able to get the skills and knowledge in a much quicker way through graduate school. But I knew what those skills were going to fill for me. And then for me, I've had lots of jobs, and sort of my mantra for when to leave a job is when it's no longer fun and you're no longer learning, or it's no longer challenging. And then this last one, find a mentor. This is still one that I am working on as well, but find a mentor who has similar experiences or can help you offer advice and guidance on your own pathway. And then in college, sort of, we get a lot of folks to apply to our job or to our organization out of college, but sort of understands the differences between research science and applied science. A lot of the work that we do is mostly applied science. So actually doing science on the ground and not necessarily the initial scientific research-based science. And then again, if you go to grad school, know what you want to go for and then how it fits into your future goals. And then both in high school and college, I'd recommend that folks look at different subjects and see what you like. And, I was really into biology, but I also had to take physics and chemistry, and I knew those were not for me. In high school, I was really into graphic design, and so I thought I was gonna go into that. But just trying, some of these other pieces like art history and web design, just to give those a chance and see how much I liked it. And then some opportunities for young folks, volunteer, intern, join a club. We currently have or have had high school interns at my organization. So that's a pathway for folks. AmeriCorps, folks are familiar with AmeriCorps, hopefully. I was an AmeriCorps member, and then I actually ended up supervising the AmeriCorps team. But there's different programs like Civic Corps, Grizzly Corps, Watershed Stewards Program, Climate Action Corps. We actually have 3 Climate Action Corps members on our staff right now. And in another organization, I had Watershed Steward Program staff. So those are opportunities. And then I wanted to add community college. And I know we sort of think about, high school, or maybe young people here talk, when I say community college, you think about, okay, after high school, community college, which is a pathway and a way to explore different subjects. But I also wanted to include this for maybe you're finished your undergrad and you've been doing some work and you're like, this isn't maybe exactly what I'm into. And then going back to community college to pick up some classes and some knowledge about, maybe you're into native plants or you're into horticulture and things like that. Community college is a great opportunity for that. And then sort of, going to where the people are. So that means, there's a lot of environmental events. I know Sustainable Contra Costa does a lot of tabling. So going around and, understanding the different organizations that are out there, the different kinds of work that they're doing, and trying to attend webinars or conferences. I know Katie always tries to bring her students previously to a conference to have young people exposed to the folks in the field and working in the field and seeing what that could look like. And then just the last thing I wanted to mention, this is actually a picture that I took when I was in Michoacan in Mexico. And this is where the monarch butterflies basically overwinter. And it reminds me of, I kind of live by this mantra, and it works for both life and kind of in work. And, after 25 years, I have just taken care of the minutes, and the years have taken care of themselves. And it's very, makes a lot of sense to me with monarch butterflies, because these monarchs are making this huge migration from Mexico to North America, United States, and it's not even the same butterfly that is making that journey. It is butterfly and then a new butterfly and a new butterfly. So those butterflies are just taking care of the minutes, and the years are taking care of themselves. But that's all I have for folks. Thank you so much for the invitation, and yeah, I'm real honored and humbled to be here tonight.
That was so beautiful. Thank you so much, Chris.
No, thank you.
All right, I'm gonna begin sharing my screen again. Okay, so now that we've had Chris's lovely presentation, we're going to take a little break before our next presentation from Katie to just give you guys an opportunity to hear about SLIA and SCOCO.
Sustainable Leaders in Action, also known as SLIA, is a youth-led branch of Sustainable Contra Costa, which is a leading sustainability nonprofit serving Contra Costa County. At SLIA, we create the change we want to see in our communities by getting high school and college-age students who are passionate about the environment involved in innovative ways to raise awareness about sustainability. SLIA is like an environmental club, but is not connected to any one high school, and is open to all in the region who want to spread sustainable solutions in our communities.
Yeah, so a lot of our programs are ongoing, just like the Climate Careers Chat, which we're doing right now. And our goal through SLIA is to promote sustainable practices within our community, just to ensure a greener future and empower the next generation of climate activists. So if you guys are at all interested in helping out with future Climate Careers Chats, or just want to learn more about what SLIA does, you can find us on Instagram at SustainableXLeaders. Email us at the email above, or we'll have more information at the end as well. So I'm going to pass it to Ellie to explain more about what the Cleaner Contra Costa Challenge is.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you, Chris. Your presentation was awesome, and I really liked how you represented all of your jobs. I feel like that was just such a great visual, so thank you. All right, everyone. So Sustainable Contra Costa's main project is the Cleaner Contra Costa Challenge. This is a free online platform where people are connected with different solutions and different actions that they can take to make a difference. And by that, I mean, this platform will help you calculate your household's carbon footprint. You can see it go down when you take these different actions. So far, throughout the whole Cleaner Contra Costa Challenge, we have saved over 4 million gallons of water and counting. So that's really awesome. And 1,620 tons of CO2, which is tons saved. Okay. Next slide, please. Thank you. As I mentioned, the Cleaner Contra Costa Challenge has different categories, actions, and resources. So if you are wanting to learn about energy efficiency, for example, or waste reduction, you would click on one of our categories. It would show you these different actions that you can take. If there are actions that you already take, for example, turning lights and unplugging appliances when you leave a room, you're already taking some of these actions. And there are different levels of difficulty for this. And then if you can see on the left below, the platform also offers free resources depending on your zip code. So they're specific to your zip code. And all of these actions also come with how-to guides. So this is really meant to have people participate in sustainability in a way that makes sense to them and provides enough information to not only get started, but understand why certain actions are being taken, which you can see when your household's carbon footprint is lowered. To visit, you can search up cleanercontracosta.org. And yeah, happy savings for everyone who goes on the platform.
Now let's return to our regularly scheduled programming. Let's go to our second speaker, Katie Noonan, who has been in the environmental outreach and education field for over 25 years. Katie is the co-chair of Rotary Nature Friends, a nonprofit dedicated to providing interpretive natural history and STEM education for all the people of Oakland. She taught high school science in Oakland for 25 years and has worked on many environmental science projects, including founding the Environmental Science Academy. Now let's play some Two Truths and a Lie with Katie. Katie, do you want to read out the two truths and a lie?
Sure. So the first statement is, I went swimming in Lake Merritt. The second is, I am learning 2 endangered languages on Duolingo, bonus in the Diamond League, bonus for guessing what they are. And 3, I did scientific research in Antarctica and in the Galapagos.
Thank you to everyone who voted earlier, but I'm relaunching the poll so that we can answer it for Katie's questions.
Okay, I see one vote for number 3 so far. I think it's I went swimming in Lake Merritt because it's like the least crazy one. But maybe that's where you're gonna get me. What do you think?
That's what I was thinking as well. The other two seem a little specific, especially the Duolingo one. Lake Merritt seems like the most normal one, so that's the one I'm picking.
Oh, looks like 2 people have chosen it as well.
I think Kate, if Katie works at Lake Merritt, I feel like she may have swam in it before, but I also think that there's a very specific answer to this Duolingo fact. I think it's maybe like 1 Diamond League or something else. All right, did everyone vote? Looks like it. Katie, which one was the lie?
Well, the lie is actually number 1. I have never gone swimming in Lake Merritt, but I have to say that there are more people who have done that than have done the other 2 things that I am claiming. Because Lake Merritt is an active recreation area where people learn how to canoe, which are kind of tippy, and also how to sail in various kinds of sailboats. And they fall into the lake regularly. And so, more people have done that. My Duolingo languages are Irish and Hawaiian, and I kind of just rambled into both of them and went, and it's kind of fun. So that's why I chose them. And then the final one has to do with something that I will tell you about in my presentation. So yeah, that's my lie. I never went actually swimming in Lake Merritt. I never fell in, and which tells you how safe it is to do recreation at Lake Merritt.
All right. So, speaking of your presentation, we're gonna pass it on to you now to present.
Okay, and yes. Okay, let's see where we are. Beginning my presentation. So I want to begin by saying how honored I am to be invited to speak to you tonight and how impressed I am with the program that the Sustainable Leaders in Action members have put together, the opportunities for everyone to engage in stewardship and helping to protect our planet that were outlined in the break are really awesome. And congratulations for putting together such a wonderful program. I am a retired high school teacher, so I'm actually not working right now in the sense of taking home a paycheck for what I do, but it's all at the end of a very fulfilling career that I have had, and I believe continues to fulfill some of my goals that I had when I was earning a paycheck. So I was a public high school teacher for 25 years. And so I probably worked with probably at least 3,000 individual high school kids. And so was working with people at the beginning of their journeys towards finding out what they wanted to do in our society and in our world. And that was part of my orientation, was that no matter what career you choose, you will be living on planet Earth. And it's really important for was important and is important now for everyone to understand our position in the world ecosystem and how we impact it, interact with it, and are influenced by it. So I chose to focus on my local body of water, Lake Merritt, and I actually spent my entire career as a teacher, as a formal teacher at Oakland High School, right by Lake Merritt. So I'm going to switch my slides up here to show you what Lake Merritt is known for. So Lake Merritt is a brackish body of water connecting to San Francisco Bay. It's highly variable, and it is probably best known for a fish kill that occurred about 2.5 years ago in August of 2022, when masses of fish of all species washed up on the shores of Lake Merritt. And it was so disgusting and so alarming. People thought that all of the fish had died in Lake Merritt and the ecosystem was dead, and that it was because of the pollution that occurred in Lake Merritt. This story made it to the East Coast, to all of the major newspapers, and that was what Lake Merritt and Oakland were known for. And at the time, I was a retired public school teacher doing environmental work on a volunteer basis with the Lake Merritt Institute and with a local organization of volunteers called the Rotary Nature Center Friends, which later became a nonprofit. Just so that we can all kind of focus on where I have focused all my career. It's in Oakland, California, one of the major cities in California, and host to major port in the United States, the Port of Oakland. And so it really connects through commerce and many other culturally in many ways with the rest of the world. So that's where I did my work, and I kind of choose to focus my current efforts. So I am a teacher, and I will begin with my pre-college days to say that I was a student at Las Lomas High School in Walnut Creek, before it was a center of commerce and whatever it is now. And at that time, Walnut Creek was a free-running creek with natural banks, and I spent a lot of my childhood playing in that creek. I left Walnut Creek for the University of California at Berkeley, thinking that I was going to be a comparative literature major, and I even got into a special program for that. But as I went on in my college career, my interests in science and in nature kind of to come to the fore, and I decided that I would switch majors. So I completed a degree in zoology at UC Berkeley, and then I had a gap year, which I call the year in the Petri dish factory, because I worked in Concord as a laboratory assistant monitoring contamination on medical Petri dish resources. And I spent just hours checking for little colonies on these petri dishes and listening to the radio. And it was actually, in some ways, a pleasurable job, but it was had no future to it. And I had, by that time, focused my interests on evolutionary biology in particular. I've always been interested in social behavior and in the why some species are really social and others tend to be solitary. And that was I wanted to pursue that kind of idea as a graduate student and was transferred to the University of Michigan to do that. While at the University of Michigan, I taught nursing students because I was in a biology program. I had to know all of the subdisciplines of biology. I had a comprehensive exam to proceed in your program as a graduate student in biology at the University of Michigan. And so I was there for a very long time because the market for people graduating at that time was very poor, and I had an opportunity to do a number of things. I studied social behavior in a local paper wasp, Pilistes fascatus, which has since been pushed out by a European invading species of paper wasp. So it's been impacted by global movement of species since that time. I also was interested in the evolution of human behavior and of humans, and published in both areas. My publication, this was in the subdiscipline known as sociobiology. And one of my papers that I wrote at that time was about the evolution of the human form, and particularly the female form, and the function of the hourglass figure. That can be, that was one of my publications. So I got to do a lot of different interesting things as a grad student. When I graduated, the market for PhDs was not really hopping. And at the same time, I married and I wanted to start a family. So I took another kind of a gap year, or 5 years actually, my family, and decided after that about 4 years that I needed to have an income, and what would I do with my training? And I decided on teaching in a kind of interesting way. I started by being a substitute teacher at in the local area. My districts that I liked and I really did a lot of substituting in were Richmond, El Cerrito, which is a part of Contra Costa. My favorite school there was Juan Crespi. I just thought I loved going there. Some in Albany and some in Oakland. And I enjoyed being a substitute teacher a lot. And when I thought about doing that, as opposed to trying to find work in somebody's lab, it was no contest. I really loved being a teacher. So that is what I decided to do. And after several years as a substitute teacher, which gave me great flexibility, I went to the Holy Names College weekend school to complete the requirements for a California teaching credential. And that was intense, but a lot of fun because I had completed a lot of my science requirements. I didn't have that much to do. And then I began working as a biology teacher at Oakland High School in the center of downtown Oakland, where I stayed for 25 years. And I found so many ways to be creative and to pursue my interests and to engage with students there that I couldn't have asked for more. In the process of this, I earned national board certification in adolescent and young adult science. So I kept accumulating credentials, which I think is an important thing to think about as you begin to put together a resume. And it could have a whole variety of things on it, comparative literature to petri dishes to teaching nurses, all of those things kind of build a picture of what you can do and that your flexibility as a potential worker. So I'd say, go for pursuing all of those interests that you have and accumulating evidence that you have engaged in that. So I retired as a formal teacher after 25 years. I skipped over that. During that 25 years, I founded a environmental science academy, which exists to this day at Oakland High School. And at that time, the state was very generous in funding for these so-called career academies. And so I was able to apply for and receive grant money that allowed me to build a really rich program with lots of field trips and lots of opportunities for internships for my students. So it was the golden age, really, as far as I can see, for education in the inner city. I'm just hoping that some of the things I do today will help to continue some of the things that were made possible for me to do as a teacher. So I'm currently the co-chair of a nonprofit called Rotary Nature Center Friends, and I'm going to show you just a couple of slides. But anyway, I am at heart a teacher. And in this picture, which was taken like maybe a month ago, I paid a visit to a local high school in the Fruitvale and talked to them about the fish kill. And what I loved about it was they had already started to form their own idea of what had caused it and done some research. And so my role was not to come and just deliver facts, but to engage with them about what they thought and why they thought it, and to maybe put in some additional information that they didn't have. So that was really fun for me. Okay, so here's my current organization. It's called Rotary Nature Center Friends at Lake Merritt. It's an independent, all-volunteer nonprofit. For 3 years, we've been able to stay afloat. And we engage the community in real science and stewardship activities, bringing people and nature together in the heart of downtown Oakland to steward the nation's first wildlife refuge, the Lake Merritt Wildlife Refuge. The Wildlife Refuge was established formally by the California State Legislature in 1970, and there are lots of stories, and there's the people's history of Lake Merritt that's all very interesting and worth pursuing. But it gives the place a certain pride of place in wildlife refuges. So the focus of our activities as an organization are some very specific community science programs. We do water testing. During the fish kill, the water lost all of its oxygen. Dissolved oxygen was 0 at the top and at the bottom of the lake. And this is something that has not occurred since then, but everybody is worried about it and wants to understand the dissolved oxygen budget. And this involves looking at many other scientific variables in the environment. So I continued doing water testing in the same format, basically, as I had done in my Environmental Science Academy, so that we've accumulated at least 27 years of community water testing. We also began looking at plankton. Plankton were the immediate cause of the fish kill. There was a species called Heterosigma akashiwa, which was normally in the lake and in the San Francisco Bay in very small numbers, but suddenly exploded in a plankton bloom. And because of its unique characteristics, it was able to just take over the entire ecosystem, and then it died. And when it died, it decayed, and all of the oxygen was consumed in the lake. No oxygen, top or bottom. That lasted for about 9 days, 5 days, 5 to 9 days. And then things came back. The other thing that we're doing is monitoring biodiversity to see if the lake has come back and we used iNaturalist app to do this, and iNaturalist projects, and also we participate in California Academy of Sciences projects. So we're in the process of gathering all this specific information. We build community and understanding about the natural world that we all live in through serving intergenerational local communities. So when we do things, we not only talk to young children, but we also involve the adults in the community. We serve primarily the diversity of Oakland, especially near the lake, which is increasingly people of color. And we work with both public and private schools. We're open to everybody. We work with organizations that have similar approaches and commitments to environmental justice and stewardship, including the Voices Are Rising, Youth Empowerment Partnership. The Climate Corps Action Fellows have been very helpful to us and have participated with our programs. And so we educate about environmental impacts that affect especially low-income parts of our community so that people understand that. I'm going to skip over, well, okay, so we've pulled together a relatively diverse board of directors with people from education, interpretation, natural history, and the arts as well, to be able to contribute to our programs. So now I want to show you some of the programs that I participated in as a teacher, with the goal of showing you how, as a teacher, was possible for me to engage in real science activities by working with other organizations, both in the education departments and also in the nonprofits. In particular, we really loved working with Chris Lim, who was known to my students as Dr. Oyster. And we went out to survey oysters, learn some field techniques for several years. And I really admire the way Chris would be able to relate this experience of being in the field to analysis and then presentation of the results. And he would carry a class through that in a matter of a couple of meetings with that class. And so it was really quite a role model for me when he did that. And I want to thank him for that. So here my students are using quadrats and guides to census the native oysters and other organisms that were growing on the rocks by Point Richmond. One of the ways that we engage all the generational levels in our community is through having an online chat program once a month. This is free to everybody, and it is completely on Zoom, so there's absolutely no risk of disease transmission or whatever. And these are called Lakeside Chats. We currently are going to have number 50 in January. We're going to hear from a migratory bird specialist who's going to tell us about the American white pelicans, of which we have sometimes up to 100 hanging out at Lake Merritt. And here we had a local community college teacher, Mark Rauzan, also a naturalist and an ornithologist, talking about his experiences on a program out of Stanford, teaching global topics and visiting the Bering Sea and studying its ecologies and interacting with native communities. It was a very rich program, and anybody can see these programs on our playlist. So jumping a little bit sideways here. I couldn't do any of the things that I did without companionship and support of my husband. This is his retirement party. And he worked for a lab in Pinole, and his lab became the site for internships for many of my students working on worked on bacteriology, and some of them actually went on to have careers in bacteriology. They probably, when they were placed there, had no great immediate interest, but then they had a chance to experience what the job would be like. So doing those things is, if they are available to you, is hugely important. Okay, so this was my classroom when I was a teacher at Oakland High School. My students were at Lake Merritt, and at that time they had a functional pontoon boat system so that the students went out in teams to test water all over the lake. And so we have a really good record from 1997, which was a El Nino year, all the way through really the present, with water quality in 5 different locations in the middle of the lake, as opposed to just walking to the edge of the lake. Let's see, so moving onward. Part of my journey was to go from a interest in academic science, which I still have a very strong interest in, to looking at some applied science topics. And I was able to connect with the PG&E Solar Schools program. Oakland High School became one of the first high schools in Oakland to have a solar array on the roof. And then we hung in with those programs for a number of years past to participate in building portable solar panels to take to in this case, they were taken to Kenya, and now they are available in other areas where people might lack enough electricity to run cell phones or simple lighting devices that are so essential for taking care of people. So my students learned how to make presentations and to build these little solar suitcases and so forth. It was a great program. They met other high school students in the region, and eventually we did go to do some service, and obviously we learned a lot in Kenya. A little booklet was made about it for children, and you can see me there with my characteristic fanny pack and hat. That was really a wonderful thing. I also was able to do research in the Galapagos because of my activities as a teacher. Many organizations and a lot of colleges, this was through the Lawrence Berkeley Labs. They offer programs in the summer for teachers to learn about a specific topic in depth and to bring that back into the classroom. And so I was able to do a number of those, and I was able to go to the Galapagos Islands to do research on 3 different occasions, which was amazing. I didn't get to see all of the tourist species, but I was able to help to contribute to knowledge about the ecosystem in the Galapagos. And we documented ecological disturbance on an island caused by the loss of the top predator, the Galapagos hawk. That loss of that predator led to the overpopulation of an island with land iguanas and the stopping of reproduction of new baby giant cacti on that island. And so this was a opportunity to kind of isolate a few variables in one place and to make a contribution to our knowledge of the ecosystem there. Jumping back in time, my students brought back some of the information that I shared with them from a trip that I made to Costa Rica as a teacher. And we started to attack the waste from our food consumption. So we started to attack trash, and we made presentations to our school board and asking them to remove the styrofoam from the school lunch program, which they did for a while. I'm not sure where they are at this point. I think they may have backslid a bit, but anyway, my students organized a campaign.
Katie,
Time to stop?
you have about 2 more minutes.
All right, let me jump over then. Okay, so many opportunities. Okay, we visited the California Air Resources Board, and some of my students made some presentations there. We do programs at a lake, including this Lake Merritt Day with trash audits, plankton monitoring, and water testing. And we were able to because of this, because students were involved in actually doing science, as well as learning about science through our programs at Lake Merritt, we were able to present some posters. And here's one about the blooming plankton of Lake Merritt, documenting lots of plankton blooms, most of which do not have any catastrophic result. After the fish kill, the rebound of water quality. And finally, hopefully, water quality. We were able to collect information by people collecting data from kayaks to demonstrate the rebounding of the Lake Merritt ecosystem. And that resulted in another program, another presentation. We are currently monitoring an influx of Chinook salmon into Lake Merritt with people who are local people. This one young lady wants to be a vet tech. Another person is in grad school at Cal State East Bay in policy. So we offer opportunities for people to engage in these things. We also follow the interests of the local people in the wildlife here. Here's a mascot bird that they are advocating for. So I want to thank everybody for listening to me. And it's been a pleasure to be here. And I look forward to any questions you have. My piece of advice is to explore, be an opportunist, follow your interests, and just there's an amazing world out there to interact with and to contribute to. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie, for that lovely presentation. It was so interesting and informational. Sorry, let me share my screen now.
I think we're okay not having it shared just because it says Q&A.
Oh, okay.
We usually stop screen sharing after we pull it up too, so I think it's okay.
Okay. So now we're just going to move on to the Q&A portion. So if you guys haven't already, please submit your questions in the Q&A portion below, or you can just type them in the chat if it's not working. So I'm going to read out our first question. So this first question is to Katie. So what does brackish mean when referring to a body of water?
Good question. So brackish is the amount, relates to the amount of salt in the water. We all know that the ocean is salty, probably around 32 to 35 parts per 1,000 of salt water. And the lake, like a brackish water lake, is somewhere in the 20s, okay, between 22 to like 28 or something like that, or to 30. That's considered brackish water. And so species have to be adapted to a particular salinity, generally speaking, in order to survive there. And if they're in Lake Merritt, it changes a lot. So they have to be they have to be versatile to be able to live in different salinity environments.
Great, that's really interesting. I had no idea. Okay, so this next question is for both panelists. Was there a catalyzing event that inspired a passion in the environment, or did your work in environmental and conservational fields stem more from a general interest? Chris, would you like to take this one first?
Sure. Yeah, when I think about sort of a catalyzing event, if it was like one event, I would have to say probably not, actually. I know that folks, I've heard folks, if folks remember here locally, when we were experiencing the smoke from wildfires from other parts, and remember when it was like orange and red in the sky, like I know folks, they saw that event and wanted to get into the field. So that's sort of an example of a catalyzing event that I know is for real, that people got into it, but not so much for me. It's sort of when I learned about the interconnections and how everything is interconnected, and then really understood that the health of our planet and our environment and um, the life and the quality of life that we live is based on the health of our watersheds and of our water and our air and all of those. And then I saw that, um, those were degrading, and we were sort of the reason for that mostly. And so how could we change that? So that was sort of, I wanted to be part of the solution, and I wanted to share sort of my passion for the environment with others, and hopefully get other folks involved and wanting to make a difference as well.
So I would answer that question differently. I would say very definitely the pressure to make money did push me into being a teacher. I had not thought when I started out that I would be a high school teacher. I was not a particularly confident and good public speaker. Still is a challenge there, but I was not something that I had in mind. But I needed to make some money, and it seemed like a good thing to try. I had some friends who were doing that as young mothers, and they were doing substitute teaching, and they liked it. And many of them went on to become teachers in their area of interest. And so I tried it. I was open to trying it. And I think that's an important thing that I would encourage people to do, is that even if it's something that you think you would never be, as it was for me, you'll find that sometimes you really love it. And I had a blast being a substitute teacher. And that's what led me into the thought that I would train to become a full-time, a regular teacher. Was there a conflict? Yes, but because there's only so much time in the day, and there's certain things that you have to do as a teacher that may not be, environmental education or involving your students in actual research that you have to do. But it was, all in all, I think as a job, it lent itself greatly to be able uh, to realize my goals and my interests.
Okay, we have another question that is to Chris. Chris, when working on your native oyster reef project, what motivated the project and what were some of the greatest hurdles during that project? Separate question, do you have a favorite aquatic species, not restricted to endangered ones?
Nice. Yeah, in the interest of time, I'll try to keep this relatively short. So in terms of motivating the project, there's sort of a lot of synergies happening at that time. This oyster reef, let's see, went in the bay about 10 years ago at this point, if not more. And there was sort of a movement at the time to do restoration in terms of native oyster restoration. Some folks are trying it, and we wanted to use native oysters as a lens to be able to view the environment, especially working with young people. So while there were scientists, more so scientists, working to restore oysters for the ecosystem services and benefits, I really wanted to restore oysters to then be able to, you saw pictures in Katie's presentation, to be able to bring students out, to be able to see the oysters and to be able to see restoration and to get engaged in that way. The other piece is that native oysters have a history of being plentiful in the bay. and being a food source for Native folks in this area. And to think about, at one time, folks were walking these shores and being able to eat the oysters that were there. And then the gold rush came, and essentially what happened is all the sediments washed down from the hills, showing the interconnectedness and basically covered a lot of the oyster beds. So to be able to, think about the history of it and to be able to think about how we can help enhance that and improve it, and not necessarily try to restore oysters to an old number of how many oysters were there, but knowing the benefits of oysters and to the environment, that this new data is a reason for us to want to do this kind of work. And then my favorite aquatic species, that's a tough one. There's a lot. I'm sure everybody here has a favorite and a lot. But I love orcas and killer whales. My personal experience, when I was working at an aquarium, they actually had a blue shark. I don't know if folks are familiar, but I actually got a chance to see the blue shark basically a little bit out of the water. And the blue of this shark's skin was the most incredible shade of blue that I have ever seen in nature. So that's my other favorite. We don't want to go into the obstacles. There's a lot of obstacles. We could talk about permitting, we could talk about funding and all of that, but we'll save that.
Okay, this next question is for Katie. So Katie, what was the name of the sociobiology paper you mentioned earlier?
Oh, the sociobiology paper? I'm not sure what is the question. Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, the sociobiology paper.
Oh my goodness. I'm gonna have to find it. I think it was human biology and sociobiology, and it was I gotta find that thing. I'll have to find it. But it was what I was hoping I would be able to give you. There's a review of the paper. It was in I think it was in the Chronicle or something. It says it's not your father's biology. Of course, it was back in the day. It's kind of a sexist thing to say, but anyway, anyway, it was looking at the evolution of the human form and especially the female human form. So I cannot say. I would love to get that to you.
Okay, here's a question for both of you. How did you manifest your passion into work? And what other paths would you have taken with your interests other than teaching for Katie? So Katie, you want to take this question first?
Well, in an alternative world, I could have had a research I would have been a researcher at the college level, and I would have pursued putting DNA analysis into some of the behavior and life history stuff that I was doing with the paper wasps. And the paper wasps, they have form new colonies each year. One of the females becomes the only one to reproduce, and the other ones just spend their little lives helping her. Why is that? Why doesn't that tendency to help get evolved out? That was a big question. There are many possible reasons why. So I would have loved to follow up on some of that. And then also, of course, I'm interested in humans, cross-cultural comparisons, and so forth. And I would have done that.
Yeah, I think for me, sort of thinking about, manifesting passion into work, I think sort of being in this work and being an environmentalist and a conservationist, it's sort of our lifestyle. It's not really like a job you go to. I'm an environmentalist at the office and then I go home and I'm not. So, my passion is because that's my lifestyle as well. And then thinking about different paths, I think one of the things that, sort of also got me into this is, watching these nature documentaries on TV and, thinking about what it'd be like to, scuba dive and things like that. And, But I'm also real interested in sort of photography and videography and sort of getting into environmental videos related to education on marine life and things like that would be really cool. And then I've also been asked a number of times if I was ever thinking about or interested in getting into teaching. And so, but I know, after being in classrooms like with Katie and I can only do it informally as much as I would like to, but yeah, props to all the teachers to do it every day.
And right, like opportunities like this one, and Katie, I'm sure you know, like there's so many ways to engage and teach that don't necessarily have to happen in a school, like in an educational setting, a formal educational setting.
Very true. Mm-hmm.
There was this other question in the chat. Do you mind if this one about balancing passion with pressure? I did want to mention this as well. It's a little bit different, I think, from when Katie was talking about it. But for me, I think I was sort of stubborn in my pathway. Sort of my culture and my family, they always wanted me to get into nursing and to get work at Genentech and those sort of traditional jobs that they knew, that were good jobs. And, my family had no idea really that this could be a career path and you could get paid to do this. And so, I was just kind of stubborn and said that this is what I'm into and I'm going to figure it out. And then, I think once they sort of saw that, okay, he can like actually support himself now, then they kind of stopped with that. But it took a while. But yeah, sort of the pressure of family and culture. But, I think I just stayed the path and, just did what I wanted to do. Beavers in Contra Costa County. Yeah, we've been looking at that. And when I talk about beavers, I'm mainly talking about, there's an acronym, it's called BDAs, which is Beaver Dam Analogs. And so essentially trying to replicate nature and trying to replicate the work of beavers within creeks. And so to be able to create sort of our own dam structures, which then do the same sort of benefits that the actual beavers do. We're not sort of at the stage of, there are beavers in Contra Costa County, but because of our proximity to sort of urban habitats and the concerns with flooding, it's not necessarily something at this point, at least, where we're trying to sort of bring actual beavers and have the sort of uncertainties related to beavers come into the mix.
All right, thank you, Chris. I'd also like to ask Katie the same question. Oh, sorry, were you gonna go, Katie?
Oh, I found it. I found the paper. Or actually, what I found, I put in a link. I don't know if it's, yeah. So if you go there, you'll see somebody criticizing the paper, which is fine. That's science. Anyway, so yeah. So now the question you'd like me to address now?
So how did you balance working your passion with the pressures from both yourself and others to earn money? Was there ever a conflict between these two desires?
Yes, because, well, actually, teaching was an ideal career for me because there are opportunities to really focus on, your passion, which in my case would be like science, and then bring it back into the other part of my career, which is, of course, teaching. And so, what I guess what I would say is you can align those two things pretty well. But in any career that you have, any job you have, it will not be pure passion, whatever you're doing. There's a certain amount of of drudge and of stuff that you don't particularly like doing that's involved in any job or career. So I thought it was a pretty good mix for me. Yeah.
How about the catalyzing event? I think our questions got
Oh, catalyzing.
crossed. Yeah.
Where's
there a
catalyze?
catalyzing event
Catalyzing what? I'm sorry.
to get you into the fields?
Well, as I said, I felt that I did need to make money. And that was the thing that catalyzed my consideration of being a formal teacher as a career. It is a hard job. It's a very hard job. You have to have a temperament that can, meet a lot of different people. You have to work with your own personality and try to be effective with each student. And that's impossible, but it's something that, and then you have to be able to um, deal with a lot of frustration. So there are a lot of things that you have to consider about that. It's probably true in any field, but it's really true in education. And so I'm very thankful to all those organizations and institutions that provide opportunities for teachers to learn and to have some less stressful opportunities to indulge some of their intellectual passions in their fields of interest. Yeah.
All right, last call for final questions.
I actually have a question for both panelists. Um, Chris, I know you mentioned how like oysters are extremely endangered, and I know both of you work with like fishes a lot and like endangered especially. Because of this, has like working in this job made you eat less seafood or just like stopped at all?
I could say I don't generally, I love seafood, but I don't eat very much of it because it is a wild food and the ocean is in trouble. Working with the salvaging of these salmon has definitely made me not want to eat salmon. Just not because for ethical reasons, but just because it's pretty disgusting. But also interesting because of their incredible life history and how that evolved and what their mysteries of what they're doing in our world. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a nice question. I've actually been a vegetarian for about 15 years now. And when I first began that, people would always ask me why. And I would say I do it for the health of the planets, the animals, and myself. And nobody asks me anymore why I'm a vegetarian. It's changed.
Emily, that was a great final question.
Thank you so much. Okay. Um, okay. I'm going to pass it over to Arv now just to give a little bit more information on SLIA.
Are you interested in sustainability and or getting involved in your community? How about graphic design, public speaking, fundraising, policy, or internships? If so, SLIA might be a place for you. We have a lot of different opportunities for you guys to get involved with the community and environment. As I've said, there's multiple different things you can do, including graphic design to public speaking. There's like infinite opportunities in whatever you find interesting. Make sure to follow SLIA on Instagram at SustainableXLeaders or email us for more information if you're interested.
Yeah, and I just want to give a huge thank you to Chris and Katie for their lovely presentations, their slideshows. They put in so much work, and we can tell, obviously, we can tell how much they care about teaching the next generation, and that's just so inspiring. And thank you so much for all of you guys' work. Again, if you guys are interested in anything related to SCOCO, SLIA, or the library, just let us know. You can email us, like Arv said. Um, yeah.
No, thank you all. Yeah, super impressive program, super impressive work. Yeah, the future is bright. I remain hopeful.
Thank you so much. It was really beautifully done and just a great organization. Thanks a lot.
Albert, do you have any final things you'd like to say?
Sorry. Yes. Just thankful for you to be here. There are participants or panelists, partnership, and looking forward to the next one. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone. Just to echo that, we're really happy that you all spent your time with us tonight. Katie and Chris, thank you so much for your enthusiasm that you showed for this program. That was really special to Emily and I, especially as we were planning this. Albert, as always, thank you. We love this partnership. And I went back and counted, and this is our 15th Climate Careers Chat. So that's just so many. But thank you. And we're hoping for many more.
And with that, we'll see you guys all at the next Climate Careers Chat. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining and listening.
Happy holidays.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Be here. Thank you.